Our office represents 4 local counties, and so through that, I have had the pleasure over the past 15 years to attend probably hundreds and hundreds of various meetings: Board of Commissioners, Board of Assessors, Board of Health, Board of Equalization, all different type things, and then also just various boards I'm on, as I'm sure you all are, being active in your communities. And so we've all seen parliamentary procedure at work, but we've seen a wide range of what boards find acceptable when it comes to parliamentary procedure. Now, I've been given the unenviable task of this topic today. You cannot cover this topic in 30 minutes. I'll just go ahead and tell you. This is the highlight version, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just run through it. If you all have any questions, please feel free to stop me as we go, and we certainly can stop and talk about anything. 2 things right off that I think are most important to keep in mind when it comes, to running our meetings is that just because we disagree with another opinion does not mean that that opinion should not be heard. And when I see procedure fall apart in these meetings is when a commissioner attempts to cut a commissioner off or something like that, when they feel that it's an opinion that does not warrant consideration or discussion. And so 2 of the most important points are that 1, the right of the minority opinion to be heard, and then 2, and equally as important, is the right of the majority opinion to rule. You can't have sore losers on your boards. Everyone should be given the opportunity to speak. Every opinion should be heard, but once the vote is taken, whatever the majority vote is, at that point is when we have to live with that, and can't be out, and I'll just be candid because I've seen it happen other places, can't be out speaking ill of other commissioners to the newspaper or any citizens or anything else. That is the quickest way to discredit yourselves to the community, is that sort of infighting. This is directly from your enabling act. Your quorum is 5. So you all have to have 5 members present to conduct a meeting. And also in your enabling act, it says that you will govern your meetings in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order. Of course, you elect a chairman each year, and they can continue to serve without limitation on number of terms. Just very briefly, we're going to go over the roles of the board. Your chair, Mr. Elliott, your presiding officer. I would argue, the most important person when it comes to parliamentary procedure in this room. Certainly, he's in charge of making sure that your meeting is running smoothly, making sure that your minority opinions are being heard, your majority opinions are being heard, and that everyone is kind of acting in accordance with the rules. Generally, you all, and many, as I said, you'll see a wide range of how people do this. Some are very, very formal to, very, very informal. Generally, you should get the floor from the chair before you speak. That prevents people talking over each other, that sort of thing. Your clerk serves as secretary. Of course, Ms. Janice, I know, does a wonderful job, and that she keeps your minutes, and she also keeps tracks of all motions and seconds during the meeting. Charlie's your parliamentarian. If you have any questions, you can look over at him, and he should be there to help you out, or if he's not there, I'm sure a member of our firm will be there for that. This is another part that you'll see a variety, is how much input you take from the public during your meetings. Generally, under Robert's Rules, the public, of course, has a right to be heard at a public hearing, and then I know you all have, which most boards do, have some type of public comment period where a citizen can stand up and speak on any topic they desire to speak on. My general rules of thumb on those type times are that any comments should be directed to the board as a whole. They shouldn't be criticizing one specific commissioner, asking one specific commissioner questions. You all don't have to answer any questions. That's their time to get up and speak to the board. But if they're out of line in addressing any individual commissioner or anything like that, then certainly they could be called down on that. These are just general courtesies. I mean, to me, these are self-evident courtesies of the board members, but I did want to just put them in there as a kind of a friendly reminder on, what is appropriate behavior. All comments should be addressed to the chair. only one question or motion discussed at the time, that sort of thing. Courtesies from the chair. I think this is very, very important, and I do want to spend some time just, pointing this out, is that very often, and you probably hear this in our, in the meetings you attend, I often hear in our Board of Commissioner meetings or various meetings, do I hear a motion? So moved. Well, for the minutes and or for the audio recording, what is so moved? What are you moving on? Technically, you need an exact wording of the motion. I move to blah, blah, blah. And then your chairman repeats that so that, there is no doubt as to what people are voting on. Who sets the agenda? You all have an agenda setting policy. And so I think you all have Mr. Junkin approve, unless it's one of you all that's requesting to be on the agenda. But a question I often get is, can an item be added to the agenda at the meeting? Yes, they can. Many people think that once you set an agenda and you've advertised that agenda, you can't add an item. Under the Open Meetings Act, you can. Now, you want to balance, of course, being smart. If you've got a controversial item that you think you're going to sneak in at the last minute, it may not be the best idea to do that. But if you have something emergent that comes up that you need to add to the agenda to discuss, certainly that is allowed. Okay, so let's get into very quickly how to take action. How do you get the floor, right? Generally, if you want to get the floor as a commissioner, you simply say, Mr. Chair, and allow, Chairman Elliott to recognize you. Technically, once a commissioner has the floor, they should not be interrupted. A main motion is what we think of generally as, a motion to take action. And the chair should not recognize a motion until it's been seconded by another commissioner. Now, I often, one other thing that's commonly misunderstood is just because you second a motion doesn't mean you agree with it, and it doesn't mean you're going to vote for it. It simply means that you're seconding that motion for the purpose of the commissioners discussing it. So you can second a motion and then ultimately vote against it once the discussion has occurred. Again, debate, these are just kind of general rules, and you'll see from the very formal in some boards to the very informal. And generally, the more attendees you have, the more formal you have to be because you have to crowd control. That is certainly you all's decision to be intentional about how formal or informal you want to be as far as, being recognized by the chair to speak. Yes, well, let's see. Mr. Chairman, do you mind if Mr. Dormney speaks? No, go ahead. y'all pipe in.
Going back to the last slide, I think it's fairly relevant to this county. There's been, I know, at least two recently where people have made motions. I believe one was in the city and one was in the county, and the motions were not seconded. What are your thoughts on that?
If a motion is made and then there's no second, it dies for lack of a second, and you move on to the meeting. Yes, sir.
I got a question. Say if a person makes a motion, and when that motion comes up and it's been seconded, if the person making the motion is in favor of that motion, can he vote either yes or no?
He still could vote no, but generally, people don't make a motion unless they're, but you're right. You could ultimately, like if there's a discussion, and then during that discussion, you hear another thought and you think, I really think that's right. You could either withdraw your motion based on that discussion, or ultimately you could vote against. Yeah, so just to be clear, even though you make the motion, you're not bound to voting yes to that motion.
In your presentation, are you going to cover withdrawing a motion?
I am, because I think that's important also. Absolutely. Mr. Turnipseed, do you have something?
If the staff is making a presentation,
Mm-hmm.
we're following the motion. Does the motion need to be made before we can ask questions?
Again, it depends on your board and how you all like to do things. In a technical compliance with Robert's Rules of Order, they like a motion and a second and then the debate and discussion. I will say in the meetings we run, a lot of times I think it's hard to form the motion until you have all the information you need to do that. And so my recommendation generally is, if you have one of your department heads or someone like that giving the presentation, let them give the presentation, ask any questions you all need to ask in order to be able to form, you know, a good motion. And then, once you get the motion in the second, if there's any other questions and or debate or discussion at that time, it could happen.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the difference between informational questions and debate.
That's right.
So during the staff's presentation, you can ask for information, which is what typically happens, but then after the motion is when you actually debate it. So,
And that's it.
And how do you end that debate?
How do you end the debate?
So call the question?
Well, and that's right. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but I think that's an excellent question. There is, as you mentioned earlier, you know, there is a way to do that. But I do want us to keep in mind, you know, the two very important kind of overarching policies of the minority opinion to be heard, the majority opinion to rule. So I very rarely hear, you know, a call to question or some sort of thing, you know, let's end this discussion and go ahead and vote. You know, sometimes you need that because you're headed down a rabbit hole and nothing good's coming out of it, and, you know, everybody's circling. But generally, you know, you need to allow all sides to discuss and be heard, and then take that. But we will cover that. Let's get to that slide, and then we'll do that a little more. This is just me giving you, you know, an example of, if you'd like to make a motion, here's how it works. One commissioner says, you know, I make a motion to proceed with, you know, awarding a contract to ABC company for planting trees, right? And then the chairman will restate that motion. The commissioners will debate and discuss if desired. After a second, of course, the chairman would restate the motion after a second. There's debate and discussion. And then, assuming nothing else, there's a vote. The chairman announces the result. Very often, I don't know if you have this, but I find this is the person making the motion thinks they know what they want, but maybe hasn't thought it through all the way, or there's something else that comes up during the discussion that they wish to add. And so, very often, you'll need an amendment to the motion. Many boards do this very informally, and so I hear people say, well, I'll just restate my motion and I'll add, you know, something. So for an example, you know, in my example, I said, we had made a motion to award a contract to ABC company to plant, you know, a certain type, or trees generally. Well, maybe the amendment to the motion is to plant a certain type of trees, you know, Leland cypress or some other specific type. Technically, under Robert's Rules of Order, you know, either you should make a motion to amend the main motion. Then there's a second, there's discussion, there's a vote on the amendment, and then the original motion has been amended, and then you take a vote on the original motion. Again, you know, it comes down to formality. Is it absolutely inaccurate? Will you get a challenge on an Open Meetings Act violation if you don't go through these steps of making a motion, if you just have your commissioner who made the original motion say, well, I'd like to amend my motion? No. But if you want to be, you know, if you want to know how it's supposed to work, this is how it's supposed to work. Do I see people doing this very often? Probably not. Most people generally just amend the motion if everybody's in agreement to do so. Now, sometimes somebody may say, well, I make a vote, we amend the motion this way, and the person who originally made the motion says, no, you know, my original motion, I want it to stand as stated. This just talks about the order of ranking motions, and we're going to talk about some common motions. But, you know, a motion to adjourn has the highest rank. So if you're in the middle of things and everybody, you know, there's a majority vote to adjourn, that actually would, you know, take a higher rank over a main motion that's on the table. Yeah, I was also a little bit surprised when I first learned that. We've already talked about, you know, that you all are specifically a 5-member quorum. Yes, Mr.
So at any point in the agenda, I mean, I'm just making something up, obviously we're gonna do this, but I mean, we get down to approval item 1, and somebody says, you know, we've been here long enough, I'll make a motion to adjourn. The rest of the agenda shuts down?
If you have a majority vote, if you have a majority vote on that, then the answer is yes. Absolutely. Yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah, absolutely. So this is one thing that I think is important. I think a lot of people get confused on is, you know, a lot of times you'll have a quorum present, but then somebody has to walk out and, you know, take a cell phone call, or somebody has to leave early to get to another meeting. You know, can you continue to conduct business if your quorum is left? The answer to that is no. And I think that's very important, and I've seen that happen and get people in trouble over the years. You have to have a quorum present. Yes, Mr. Dormany?
To take official action.
To take official action. I was just headed there. So you can continue the discussion once the quorum leaves, but as far as taking a vote or taking official action, that could not happen. Now, under the Open Meetings Act, there are generally you have to have a quorum present, in person. There are certain exceptions to that. If there was an emergency situation, which you all may find yourselves in with a hurricane or something else, you could attend by phone. There's also a couple of exceptions that allow individual commissioners for personal reasons. If they have health issues or they're traveling for some other reason, you can call in up to 2 times a year for that. And I just mentioned, just because I've seen this before, a lot of times, and I don't know that we would see this as much with you all, perhaps is, with some of my smaller counties, they want to not vote on an issue because it's an uncomfortable issue. Well, unless they have a technical conflict of interest, which really there's a lot of different conflicts of interest as far as when you think of it in the general sense, but from a technical analysis of a legal conflict of interest, it's very narrow. And so generally, if you do not have that, and I encourage you, if you think you have one, talk to your attorney about it.
We're going to talk about conflicts of interest in
Good.
my presentation.
Good.
But the policy requires you to disclose that to the commissioners and then have that put on the minutes.
What
So-
does it do to the quorum?
Excellent question. So as long as you have a quorum there present, say you've only have 5 members present, but then you have, for the purpose of one vote, one commissioner who has to abstain because of a conflict of interest, that does not harm your quorum. But it obviously it could arguably change, like if you had 2 members who had a conflict, that could change the number of votes required to pass it as an official action, but that would still be sufficient for an official action.
I think I saw in the 2016 orientation, when it was defining quorum, I went back over there. I was surprised to see that, I think it said a quorum required not only 5, but 1 representative from the county and 1 from the city. Is that still?
We can double check your enabling act. I do not remember reading that.
I think it was in the early version.
It may have- I was gonna say, yeah.
Two, it had to have a supermajority. But I mean, now effectively, if it requires 1 from the city, 1 from the county, there's only 1 from each, so,
Right.
Yeah.
city and county would have to agree.
Couldn't
I
have
think
a
that's
quorum unless-
changed.
Yeah, that was not in the version I read. We can double check that to be sure, but I do not believe so. Yes.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
So we have a quorum of 5. We take 4 passing, the activity.
Well, No, it would take 3, so it just takes a majority vote. So if you have 5 present, then it could be a 3-2 vote. Now, if you have 6 present, then you're exactly right. It could be a 4-2 vote or, something of that sort.
So, I mean, we've had members abstain because they just said, I don't really agree with that, I'm abstaining. That means technically you're voting against, is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I've had a lot of people ask me that question over the years. Is an abstention a yes vote or a no vote? Well, what an abstention is you have a certain amount of votes required to get a majority vote. So say that you all have, what is your full member board at 7? 7, okay. So if your full member board is here, then it would require 4 yes votes to pass something. Well, if someone abstains, that's just a no vote. So, I say it's a no vote. It is a no vote by the fact that it's not a yes vote, if that makes sense, because you have to have 4 yes votes to pass that official action.
So what? Point of
So
clarification
essentially,
then.
it is a no vote.
So let's just say the mayor's not here, and now all of a sudden it's 3 and, something becomes 3 and 3.
Mhm.
And you don't want to vote, or I'm sorry, that's not a good math example.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to say, if something is truly a conflict of interest and you abstain, it still counts as a no vote?
It counts as a no vote by the fact that it's not a yes vote. And I know that sounds confusing, but you've got to have 4 yes votes,
Right.
assuming you're 7. So it counts as a not a yes vote, which makes it a no
So
vote.
it's not like I'm not here for that vote, it's that I'm still in the denominator.
That's right.
So if you abstain, it isn't required to have a reason to abstain.
Well, generally, it is not technically, now, you all may have local policies that address this in your conflict of interest policies, and I have not, reviewed that. But under Georgia law, there are reasons for abstention when it comes to the business that you all do. If you're on a planning and zoning board, there are other reasons that may be applicable to them. So when I always say, when it comes to conflict of interest, each specific fact pattern needs to be looked at with a fresh eye. And of course, the earlier, don't do that to Charlie, and that's what I get, 5 minutes before the meeting. Hey, can you look at this for me? I think this may be a conflict of interest. Call him the day before, give him 12 hours to figure it out. All right, let's keep going.
Very, very quick.
Oh, yeah,
question.
sure, yeah.
I work for the hospital.
Right.
If something about the hospital is on the agenda, for example, and I abstain, is that reasonable?
I, again, would say I think each specific one has to be looked at. Do I generally think you have to abstain when it comes to anything having to do with the hospital? I say no.
Okay.
But I do think each specific one needs to be looked at very carefully, because you don't want to get in hot water, certainly, and you don't want any, conflict of interest allegations. And of course, there's a true legal conflict of interest, and then there's the appearance of a conflict of interest. And very often, those are two very different things. All right, I don't want to run through very quickly. I know we're short on time, but I want to run through very quickly. These are the common motions, some of which are often used inaccurately, but I think these may be helpful for you all to just hear some of these common motions. A motion to postpone indefinitely. That basically means, this is a terrible topic. We never want to discuss it again. Kill a stupid motion, I call it. A motion to postpone to a time certain. I'm sure you all have heard motion to table. That, to me, is used kind of inaccurately as a motion to postpone to a time certain. And I even use motion to table. Again, it comes down to how formal or informal your board wants to be. But if you want the technical version of how to table an issue to be discussed later, maybe at the next meeting or something like that, you motion to postpone to a time certain. Motion to refer to a committee. Pretty easy to understand. It's exactly, if you need more information or you want someone to look at it before you all take a vote, there you go. Motion to limit or extend limits of the debate. If you have an issue that you think is going, you want to go ahead and set a time limit in the beginning, or if you have an issue that's just gotten out of hand and one of the commissioners wants to say, listen, I think if we give this an hour's worth of discussion, we don't need to get past that. So, and if everybody agrees and there's a majority on vote on that, then you can certainly limit or extend the limits of a debate. A motion to vote immediately, and this is what Commissioner Copeland had referenced earlier, which is, the previous question. If you believe the discussion should be over, you're ready to vote, you can, move to have that vote done immediately, and that will stop the debate. Again, not that I discourage this, because I think there are certainly proper times when, all the opinions have been heard, everything's been discussed, people are just saying the same thing over and over, and you're headed nowhere. That can be a helpful motion. But I do not like to see boards use that prematurely, because again, you want to go back to your two, overarching goals of having both opinions, majority opinion and minority opinion heard, and having, a respect for the majority's rule.
And when that motion is made, all of these motions.
Yes, sir.
Say that motion, you still need a second,
That's right.
and you need a vote.
That's exactly right.
Before moving to the vote on the other one.
That's exactly right. It's just like amending the motion. I think of it, you kind of put the main motion on pause or on hold until you address the secondary motion. Once that is resolved, whether it's a motion to amend or a motion to go ahead and vote immediately or the previous question, then you can handle the main motion on the floor. Motion to lay on the table is simply, propose that it be postponed to the end of the meeting. So, for example, if, someone was supposed to come speak and has not showed up, and you really wanted to hear from them before you took a motion on an agenda item, this would be, the technical language of the motion that you would need. Now, honestly, in a lot of our meetings, what I hear is, hey, so-and-so's not here, can we move this to item K instead of considering it in item A? Again, is that a violation of the Open Meetings Act? No, but it becomes important to know this if there's some disagreement. If it's a controversial issue and, some commissioners don't want to wait, they want to go ahead and address it, then this can be helpful so you can actually take a vote on that motion. Point of order. You all may or may not have heard of this. Basically, if you think there's been a violation of parliamentary procedure, you can raise a point of order. A second is not required. I'll tell y'all just a very quick point of order story. When I was, and this has been a long time ago, much gray hair ago, but I was at a very small county commissioner meeting, and they had a very controversial topic that night, and they had 200 plus people at their meeting, had moved their meeting down to the courtroom, and they had 5 commissioners, and they were all lined up. Well, there was a lot of heated debate, both from the audience, from the commissioners. Well, there was this one older gentleman who I actually sat near, and he was 85 plus. I do not know how old he was, and he was an old farmer, but he disagreed with the majority opinion. He was actually the minority opinion in this. So when the majority opinion started speaking to make a motion, he stood up and said, something to the effect of, "You young whippersnapper, I don't care what you think, I will take you out back and I will beat your mm-mm-mm." So at that point, I would have liked my chairman to say, "Point of order." You know what my chairman said? Nothing. So there was more, and then there was some, movement toward going over to beat that young kid's little ass, and I was like, "Woo, okay." So I had to stand up and say, "Point of order, Mr. Chairman." That did not require, obviously I'm not a board member, but as the parliamentarian, and since my chairman was not doing it, nor were any other commissioners, I felt at that point I had to stand up and say point of order. And so if something like that's going on, and that's an extreme example, but, it happens because certainly people get very passionate and very heated when it comes to county government and water and sewer and all the different things that we're involved in.
Well, excuse me.
Yes, please. Yeah,
Often,
Commissioner Duncan.
Had a little experience with that at a national convention. And, if we get to chasing rabbits on a subject that's not the subject at hand, that's another good use.
Absolutely.
of parliament.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I often,
Like one project, somebody starts meandering onto another, and we start all chasing that. That's a good way to get us back on track.
that's exactly right. And your chairman, as your presiding officer, certainly can do that, but you all as commissioners also can kind of help him with that, if people are headed off down a rabbit trail. We're almost done. 2 slides left, I think. A motion to reconsider just allows the board to debate whether or not to, debate on a decision made at a meeting in progress. All right, so this motion actually applies if you voted at the meeting that you're currently at. This is a motion to reconsider. A motion to rescind, to me, is the same thing as a motion to reconsider, except it's if you're trying to discuss it at a later meeting or overturn at a later meeting. It's very complicated analysis as far as when can you do that, when can you not. Obviously, if you've already taken or implemented the action, some governments have rules in place where once a majority vote has been taken, official action approved, you cannot change that for 6 months. And that just prevents people from, continuing to bring up the same subject when, when you've already covered that, you've already had a majority vote on it. But as long as you don't have a specific policy in place like that, you always can have a motion to rescind as long as the original motion has not already been implemented. Yes, sir, Commissioner Stevens.
What's the gray line between, a motion to rescind, a motion to rescind consideration, et cetera, versus it not being on the approval agenda?
It not being on the, all right, now tell me a little bit more about which
So not on
question
the
is there.
approval agenda, and let's just say, somebody makes a motion that's not on the approval agenda.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we vote on something and approve it, well, it wasn't on the approval agenda, so we have to vote, put it on the approval agenda immediately before that?
Vote, put it on the agenda.
So here's the, the technical answer to that is a good meeting management, and I don't know how you all do it over here. Do y'all have work sessions before you have your meetings, or how does, yeah? Sometimes, okay, yeah. So, right, so I think a technical answer to your question is, if, say for instance, you have a citizen that comes and makes a passionate plea, and you have a commissioner that then wants to make a motion to address whatever that passionate plea is. In general, I say that is bad business management, because a lot of times, you haven't researched the issue, you haven't had your staff look into it, and so there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to respond that way. But from a technical, open meetings question, is it legal if you wanted to take a response, if you wanted to do that. You know, I think the answer to that is yes, although I fully agree. So you all's meeting management, if you all have a section of your agenda that's approval, you know, it sounds like you're very organized, very, very diligent. I would say as a policy that you all have established is not to do that.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, you know,
Yeah.
some of the stuff you're saying, any commissioner make a motion anytime. Well, as soon as we make a motion and voted on, technically it's an approval. Obviously, it's not always just because, I mean, it's approval, but it's not necessarily approval agenda. So I was just curious how
Yeah,
other organizations manage that gray line. I mean,
That's right.
once the motion's been made, before you vote on it, you have to go back and say, hey, by the way, I just made that motion, but also I'd like to make a motion to add that motion to the agenda.
Right. So technically, from a technical sense, although it could be your policy to add it to the agenda, from a technical sense, I don't think you have to add it to the
Okay,
agenda.
that's
I
what
think
I was
you could take a vote based on, you know, like I said, the passionate plea example.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm 5 minutes over already. Like I said, you can't cover parliamentary procedure in 30 minutes, but at least that was a quick overview, and I'm certainly happy to discuss any further questions, or else I'll hand it over to Carly.
You can do a copy of that presentation.
Yes, sir.
Janice has a copy, so I'll be sure that it's emailed.
But there's
out.
also, there's a memo in your book.
Jennifer provided in the book.
Yeah. And the,
Review the table of contents, that'll give you everything that's in the book, and it is by the numbered index. So for example, section 16, parliamentary procedure, Jennifer provided that for us. So, Charlie and I went through the book, and we looked at all the sections and everything previous to the table and the information gathered.
I do, I have, let's see. There we go. No, I was doing that. So, there we go.
There you go,
All right. Good. Yeah, there's a memo in your notebook about parliamentary procedure, and there's also in your notebook the policy that I'm going to be reviewing today. This policy came up a little while ago. Just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with it. It covers your role, conduct, and responsibilities. We will try to hurry through this. Certainly, you can have a copy of this presentation, but it is just merely a shorter version of what the policy says. To begin with, the policy of the JWSC commissioners that governs it is essential that the commissioners appear independent and impartial, and that they follow proper channels of the JWSC organizational structure, do not use their public office for personal gain, and maintain public confidence. Generally, your roles, conduct, and responsibilities include to develop the vision and mission and priorities, ensure the funding, represent the JWSC within the community, establish ethical values of the JWSC, monitor management control policies, have some sort of self-assessment of the commission, and enact policies in furtherance of the JWSC mission, and primarily to appoint the executive director, which we will get into just a little bit. And please, if you have questions, ask them while we're going through this. Y'all know this is informal, so since we're a little behind, I'm going to roll through the definitions part. I think everybody can pretty much figure out what a financial interest is, but it is defined very specifically within the policy, a gratuity as well, and a kickback. Now, the first section we want to talk about relates to undue influences. Commissioners can't give reasonable basis for the impression that any person can improperly influence a commissioner. Okay, so that doesn't say just that you can't improperly influence. You can't tell someone that you can be influenced. You can't give the impression that you can be influenced. Okay, this is a very broad policy in some instances. You can't use your influence to secure any individual a position or other advantage in employment with JWSC. That means you can't use your influence to get someone a raise, you can't get someone hired, you can't get someone fired, or anything like that. All right? All right. Also, with regard to gifts, loans, favors, and promises, a commissioner can't accept anything of value if it tends to influence you in your official duties or will be involved in any official act affecting the donor. You can't solicit any kickback or offer any employment for facilitating any transaction involving JWSC. Now, the previous section does not apply to occasional non-pecuniary gift of less than $25. So every now and then at the staff meetings, when I stop by, I always get coffee on the way to the staff meetings. Sometimes I'm a little late, running a little late, so I'll stop by Dunkin' Donuts to get my coffee, and I'll grab 12 donuts for the staff. Less than $25. I don't do it every week. And I don't think it's really appreciated. Rarely get eaten, but anyway. No, I'm not late. I'm not late. It also does not apply to an award that is publicly presented to you for your public service. Okay. It also does not apply to a commercially reasonable loan from a bank. Now, of course, we do business with BB&T and various other financial institutions. So just you going to the bank and getting a commercial or reasonable loan is not a violation of this policy. However, if BB&T or someone were to give you a interest-free loan that is not commercially reasonable, that may be a violation of the policy. All right. The gifts loans section also does not apply to campaign contributions in compliance with Georgia campaign laws. Okay. I'm not an expert on Georgia campaign laws, but as long as donations to your campaign, if you're elected, as long as it follows campaign guidelines, then it's not a violation of the policy.
Charlie, how does that first one, the $25 limit on a gift, and I'm thinking about, like, if you're on a business call outside of the commission, we all have businesses, and you have someone who's interested in winning your business, and they take you to lunch, and they buy your lunch. Does that mean because I'm a commissioner that in my other life I cannot let a potential vendor buy me business, buy me lunch?
No, sir, I don't think that would apply. But we want to make sure that that vendor is not applying for, right, that we want to make sure that that vendor is not applying for a position, a contract with JWSC. Yeah. So you can separate your duties or separate your personal life. All right, misuse of confidential information and providing misleading information. There's actually nothing in the policy that relates to providing misleading information, but policy does say that no commissioner shall, without proper legal authority, disclose confidential information disclosing JWSC affairs. Okay? Official appearances, public comment. The policy prevents you from appearing on your own behalf without making a disclosure, whether paid or unpaid, before any court or any body concerning any JWSC issue except for in your regular duties with the JWSC. Okay. Now this may come up, a chamber meeting or something like that. I think that we've gone to in the past where we've gone when we had the capacity issues and so forth like that. But it was disclosed to everyone that certain commissioners were going to speak on the JWSC behalf. So that would be fine. Also, you can't provide public comment contrary to JWSC official action. So if the JWSC has officially acted on something, you can't provide public comment contrary to that official action. You must support the official decisions made by the JWSC as a whole. However, it does not apply to your personal opinion if you declare that you're expressing your own personal opinion and not speaking for the JWSC.
So how does that work? I mean, not something contrary, I mean, controversial necessarily, but like last night, for instance, I saw the paper this morning on Commissioner Murphy had a town hall meeting. I live on St. Simons, if I had gone as a citizen, and somebody asked him something from Joint Water Sewer, and he said, well, there's one of the Joint Water Sewer commissioners, ask him.
Mhm.
Now what? I say, no, that's not why I'm here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in my own, I generally avoid those meetings, but there's only one meeting that I ever got called on during an Island Planning Commission. Somebody did exactly that. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I never went to another Island Planning Commission meeting again.
Well, I have to go to a lot of stuff for other things in Joint Water Sewer. I mean, what's the official
Best
stance?
response that you can give is, I can't speak for JWSC, we have not talked about this, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Right. I can't speak on behalf of the JWSC, but my personal opinion may be, yeah,
As
yeah.
long as you make sure they know
Yeah.
what you think is your own personal opinion.
All right, conflicts of interest and impartiality. Each commissioner shall, the policy says each commissioner shall avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest, okay? So that doesn't mean you necessarily have to have a conflict of interest. You can't even give the appearance that you do. Now, what does the appearance of a conflict of interest mean? Is when a reasonable person would conclude from the surrounding circumstances that the ability of the commissioner to protect the public interest or impartiality perform a public duty is compromised by financial or personal interest in the matter or transaction. So no commissioner should advocate for or use his position to influence or retain for himself, family members, etc., employment with the JWSC. That is definitely a conflict of interest. It includes hiring, advancing. This is similar to the policy before, but securing advancement, promotion, transfer, or anything like that. Now, also, no commissioner shall engage in any business or transaction with the JWSC or have a financial or private interest, direct or indirect, in any JWSC contract or proposed contract, okay? And there's a lot more meat to this policy than what I'm telling you. All right, also no commissioner will directly or indirectly participate in any JWSC procurement. And this policy, this provision here, I think is improperly worded, but I will read it nonetheless. In any JWSC procurement or real estate transaction in which the commissioner has a financial interest with regard to any matter in which he knows or should know that he has a direct or indirect financial interest in the subject matter of or in the outcome of any official action. Seems like to me there's a lot more words than that than there needs to be. Essentially, you can't participate in the procurement process or a real estate transaction, okay? No commissioner will use or attempt to use his position to secure unwarranted privileges or exceptions for himself or other business entities, persons, including employees. Disclosure. This is disclosure of conflicts of interest. Any commissioner who has a private or business financial interest, direct or indirect, in any contract or matter pending before or within any division of the JWSC shall disclose such private interest to the JWSC, either in written form or verbally. The full extent of the interest shall be disclosed, and such disclosure shall be entered in the records of the JWSC. So if we are voting on something and you feel like you have a conflict of interest, you need to disclose that to the JWSC, and Janice will include it in the minutes. All right, the commissioner then making the full disclosure shall disqualify himself from participating in any discussion or vote related thereto, unless, and I don't think this is worded right. I think this is, the policy needs to be amended here. Unless the commission determines that interest declared is not of such a nature as to avoid undue influence, whether actual or apparent, the vote of the commissioner making the disclosure. I think that needs to be amended. I think that's what that is intended to say is unless the JWSC believes that it won't exert undue influence over the voting process. Okay? Communications in executive session are confidential under Georgia law, and the commissioner should maintain that confidence. Now, Jennifer, one of the things that sometimes we have issues that come up between JWSC and the county and JWSC and the city. Of course, we have a city commissioner and a county commissioner, and we sometimes have sometimes they're asked to leave the room, sometimes they leave the room voluntarily. However, I believe that if they remain in the executive session, anything that's said there cannot be shared with.
They should hold that in confidence, and then whatever is shared publicly, if you come out of the executive session, there's discussion in the open meeting or a vote in the open meeting, certainly that part could be discussed back with your respective county or city, but as far as what's discussed in executive session, I agree, that's held inviolate as part of your service to this board, separate from your service to the county and city, and I know that is a difficult line right there.
And the question is, if you discover that something has been revealed out there, how do you deal with it?
That's also a good question. I've actually had that question personally and have researched that question. You know, there is not a good answer to that, to be honest, under Georgia law. As far as what we generally have done is we have, you can have a policy in place that can address that. You can certainly have your other commissioners speak to the commissioner that's the one that's part of the problem. But as far as, you know, are you guilty of a misdemeanor under Georgia law or something like that, there's not much out there.
So let's say 5 commissioners in executive session. Does that mean they have to hold it in confidence from the other 2 who are not there?
I say no. Are you saying if they just weren't present that day?
Right.
No, I think if they were part of that, if you are, you know, an appropriate member of that board and you just were absent that day, then yes, you can discuss what was discussed in executive session with them. Absolutely.
And recall, although this policy is for the commissioners themselves, this policy also applies to anybody that may be in the executive session. Non-interference and organizational integrity. Commissioners shall refrain from unduly interfering with the daily administration and affairs of the executive director and staff. All right, now recall that the executive director and staff are tasked, they are the ones that are tasked with policy implementation, administration, and day-to-day operations. The executive director is under the JWSC as a whole, not as, he doesn't work for any individual commissioner. The staff is under the authority of the executive director, and like I was saying, any individual commissioner lacks authority over the executive director or the staff, okay? Now, again, no commissioner shall use individual authority to influence the executive director in his duties or any other employee. No commissioner shall use or attempt to use his individual authority to influence or direct any JWSC staff in the performance of their duties. And then a list of things that you should not do. Do not use your position to influence any type of JWSC procurement, policy, contract, or matter or transaction. You cannot, acting alone, make suggestions to any employee except the executive director regarding hiring or firing. You may not individually, as a commissioner, attend or participate in any disciplinary hearing unless you are a fact witness and your testimony is needed at the hearing. Okay, we actually had one hearing where a commissioner did attend the hearing, but he was part of one of the fact witnesses. That was probably 2 years ago. No commissioner shall linger or tarry in the workplace. When a commissioner desires to enter the workplace, the JWSC offices, for an official business reason, he should first contact the executive director or his designee for assistance.
Can I ask you a quick question? One day we all got an email from Jimmy that said there was a really bad washout on the island that was just an emergency. It was shutting down part of the South End Island, et cetera. I live right around the corner from that. On the way home, I just wanted to lay eyes on it to see what it was. And if there was staff, obviously, I just rode by, looked at the hole. Is that inappropriate, or is that like? be
No.
there, or is that?
No, as long as you don't grab a hard hat and jump in the hole.
Okay, I mean, it's okay to, if you're out and see staff working, you can stop them and say, hey, thank you all for what you're doing,
Yep.
et cetera, great
Yeah,
job.
You should go to the work sites, they're appreciated, but you shouldn't interfere in the conduct of business.
I just want to clarify.
I'm not sure what the official definition of tarry is. I know what linger means, but you definitely shouldn't tarry either. Moving on, each commissioner shall uphold the JWSC policies, shall not request any employees commit any active violation of the policies. Implementation of the JWSC policies is the responsibility of the executive director. The executive director is authorized to make all decisions, take any action, develop all activities as long as they are consistent with JWSC policies. Any authority delegated to the staff shall be accomplished by policy and through the executive director. Okay? Compliance with laws, of course, no commissioner shall knowingly engage in any activity or transaction that is prohibited by any law which is applicable to him by virtue of his position, and commissioners are expected to abide by all laws, whether federal, state, or local laws. Other standards, public property, you shouldn't request JWSC owned property be used for your personal convenience or profit. You shouldn't grant any special consideration or treatment to any citizen. Political recrimination, no commissioner shall promise an appointment or threaten a dismissal from any JWSC position as a reward for any political activity. Withholding information, you should not knowingly withhold information which would impair the proper decision-making of the JWSC. All commissioners shall settle all accounts between them and the JWSC in a timely fashion. Hopefully none of us are on the delinquent accounts list, right? Contemporaneous employment, no commissioner involved in the procurement process shall be employed by any person or business entity contracting with the JWSC. Now, for the purposes of contemporaneous employment provision, contracting means performing a JWSC contract or actively seeking an award of a JWSC contract. This includes subcontracting with any contractor who was awarded a contract by the JWSC. Any violations of the policy or furnishing false or misleading information during the investigation should be brought to the JWSC, who can take the following actions depending on what type of commissioner they are, the city or the county. If they are city or county commissioners, then the JWSC may request the governing authority to recall that commissioner and appoint a replacement. If it's a violation by the chairman, he may be removed and appoint another person for the duration of the chairman's term. JWSC may issue a public reprimand in addition to or as an alternative to the things we just talked about. And of course, the decision of the JWSC is binding and final on the matter regarding the violation. All right, that was a very quick run through. Yes, this is pretty much copy and pasted from the policy. It's trimmed down a pretty good bit. I would prefer that you refer to the actual policy that's in your notebook because that's the official policy. This is not official. But we've got about 4 minutes until.
Commissioners, questions?